outcome metrics. So let's talk a little bit about these outcomes that we're trying to drive. We've talked about them a little bit. We know that there's still more information that we need from CMS, but what will you just walk us through quickly, like what are at a high level these metrics that we're trying to get?
Yep. So this graphic here does a great job of describing what are the conditions associated with each track and what are the qualifying metrics related to them. The key thing that I will point out is that for each of the metrics that are listed here, Medicare is going to establish a threshold for improvement or a threshold for control. And so you want to meet one of either two of those items in order to have qualified for hitting those measures. The measures are very specific to the clinical tracks. And so if you're looking at the CKM, for example, they're going to be looking at biomarkers. I mentioned A1C as an example. If you're looking at MSK of behavioral health, they're going to be looking at standardized measures of functional improvement for patients or maintenance of improvement in regain of function or behavioral health for those conditions. So Medicare has yet to establish the thresholds specifically. What I will say is that these measure specifications for these measures exist in some format. With MIPS, you can look at the MIPS data set. They're going to have a lot of detail about what information you need to be gathering. And so I would direct you to those resources to get a little more insight as to how to kind of operationalize tracking of these measures.
Yeah, I think the MIPS parallel is really interesting and really helpful because when Access first came out, that was my first thought, was this sounds similar in some ways to MIPS. And MIPS has a really large database of different improvement activities and how CMS values those different activities and how they sort of think about different metrics and different activities that providers are participating in that they want to incentivize. And it's not directly applicable here for Access, but I do think if you're not familiar with value-based care generally, that might be a really good place to start and just sort of like look around at what are the relevant activities that are already defined in more detail under MIPS, and what can you sort of pull into your Access model that might also be relevant here. A couple of really, really quick notes. You'll see in the bottom left of the screen, there are two important takeaways, two sort of a couple of definitions that we don't have yet, and also just sort of something to think about, which is participants will be required to independently establish baseline metrics for individual patients. So while CMS will give us some additional definition in terms of, you know, what type of improvements they want to see and you know, what the threshold will be for those improvements and for actually achieving, you know, success, how they define that, we'll have that, but you will have to have a mechanism for establishing a baseline. And so you'll want to know how long does it take to establish a baseline for HbA1c versus establishing a baseline for pain intensity or overall function of a patient. And you want to make sure that you're prepared to do that, which again is something we'll talk about in a little bit more detail in the next part. And then the last thing I will say, and Luis, I think you already touched on this a little bit, but CMS has not defined minimum improvement or control levels for purposes of these outcome metrics. So again, that's another piece of information that we're just keeping our eye on, and we will certainly share more as we have that information. All right, let's move on now to data and interoperability. Luis, this is you, so take us away on this one too.
Yeah. So Kaitlyn and I would be more than happy to introduce anyone who's interested to some of our mutual friends at the Health Tech Nerds community who will do a much better job of covering these requirements. But in a nutshell, there is a lot of strict data and interoperability requirements. So you as an organization have to build a pretty robust tech stack in order to be a participant. So you have to have an API that reports measures in a FHIR compliant way. So ensuring that you have that infrastructure in place is essential. You will need to establish bi-directional connectivity with a health information exchange resource so that there's visibility into the conditions of patients for participants and for CMS. And then there is going to be a standardized protocol for reporting population health measures using an API. Beyond that, there are some strict requirements around care coordination communications with any sort of primary care or specialist practitioners that are rendering care for these patients. So within 10 days, organizations have to report initiation of care to a referring clinician. If there's a need to escalate care to an outside clinician based on information that's been gathered, that has to be reported within 10 days. And within 30 days of care completion, you have to provide reporting on outcome measure performance. So this infographic at the bottom has some good discussion of what are some required technical infrastructure capabilities that you want to have. You want to be able to build the ability to report to CMS, to assess beneficiary eligibility in alignment with the relevant clinical tracks, and have provider to provider communications. These are kind of the basic blocking and tackling that you'll need to have as an active access participant from a data and interoperability standpoint.
Yeah, and just the other thing about access that we haven't really touched on in this video, and we won't go into too much detail about it because we're already over time, but keep in mind that these reporting requirements are not only requirements where you have to report to CMS, but they'll be publicly available as well, similar to star ratings. If you're familiar with star ratings for different insurance plans, it's really important that if you're going to participate in access, not only do you feel confident that you can be successful for the benefit of patients, but that you're partnering with the right partners that you believe will sort of all be able to work together to drive toward the right outcomes. Because if you don't do well or your partners don't do well, that's going to be public. So keep all of that in mind. Hopefully this data infrastructure will be a way to make it easy for you to do that reporting and to sort of track and share information as much as you need to. But keep in mind that the reporting requirement is great and important in a lot of ways, but also can result in public records about how well you're doing in this model. All right. Okay, so this is my favorite part of the discussion, and if you're looking at your screen and like tapping, going, why isn't this image loading? It's because I played a trick on you. It's not actually going to load. It's blurred out for a reason, and that reason is because in order for us to go through what this actually means, what access really means for digital health, we need a lot more time to talk about the details. And so in the next video, we're going to start off with this image. We're going to unblur it. You're going to be able to see some really cool maps that Luis put together for the different ways in which digital health companies in particular can participate in access. When I say participate in access, I'm not talking about participant as in the way that we talked about at the beginning, but what are some ways that you can move the needle, make an impact in the access model now that it exists. So come back for the next part of this video. We've got some really exciting information, some really detailed deep dives into operational considerations, financial considerations, legal considerations. We'll talk about timeline, and then we'll round it all out with a readiness assessment so that you can start to think about right now at this moment in time, how ready are you to apply as a participant or to make an impact in other ways? And what do you need to do to increase that readiness score? So come back for the next part. We're really excited to share it with you. Luis, do you have any final words?
No, just don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions about the material we've covered. There's a lot of detail, and we're happy to talk live about it with you all.
Yep, exactly. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for joining us in exploring the details of the access model. We invite you to watch our other videos on the basics and paths to success in the access model. Welcome outreach if you have any questions.